Okay. A, African, A, American, C, community, E, economic, T, transformation, S, survey.
Welcome to the Writers in the Community class. I teach in UNM Chicano Studies, and this is the second program I've had the opportunity to teach in as an African American instructor with a community that, let's say a racial community that I don't necessarily identify with, but certainly an ideological community that I identify with. And I think it speaks to the idea that we can all learn something from other people's liberation. So I learn from their story, and then I get to be in here and share my story, and hopefully these students learn from me. When I first heard the term statistically insignificant, I was a first-year employee at the Office of African American Affairs. I lived here all of maybe 2.5 years, and I was reading a Department of Health, New Mexico Department of Health report about like cancer rates. It had cancer rates for Anglos, it had cancer rates for Hispanic, Latino, Chicano, and it had cancer rates, like these are mortality rates, death rates, right, for the Native American population. And then when it got to the African American population, there was no line, there was no dot, there was an asterisk, and it said statistically insignificant. My first thought was that how do you tell a black person who lost their spouse, their child, or their grandparent that your grandparent's death doesn't count? You know, and I know that it might not be politically expedient or prudent necessarily to cater to our community. It's not gonna necessarily result in an overwhelming electoral landslide of any sort. It may even be an unpopular thing to do because you're gonna have larger communities saying that, why are you paying so much attention to them because there's only 10 of them, right? But it's the right thing to do.
I feel like I have a lot of cross-sector experience that I bring to AACETS, and I also have been a volunteer and a worker in the Black community for all those years that I've been here. That was my upbringing, is that you get in to your community and you start to work and you do what needs to be done.
I really like what Kathy was doing in the community. I was already impressed with the work that she had done with the Black History Organizing Project and bringing all these community organizations together. And like me, she's an artist, and that's what she was using to do it.
So Hakeem and I were both looking for ways to do programming for our youth. Positive youth development was something that we were both interested in, and we knew that if we came together that we could kind of figure out a model that worked.
It began with just a brainstorm, like who can we talk to? And then it started to grow into a bigger conversation like, well, we've talked to some foundations and nobody seems to be interested in this work. And that led to more questions like, so what is the investment, the philanthropic investment particular to the Black community? And then it just became a bigger like investigation into, okay, so how do we raise this issue?
Well, we started looking at the Kellogg Foundation. They came into New Mexico and they said they were going to be here for a generation. They wanted to make some significant inroads into changing life in New Mexico. And we saw that they were doing some targeted interventions in the Native American community, targeted interventions in the Hispanic community, and that we did not have that same level of targeted intervention. So we went to the Kellogg Foundation and said, why don't we look at doing something that focuses on building and strengthening the Black community in New Mexico, because we feel like that's an important piece of this whole puzzle. If they were going to be successful in their mission, then everybody has to be included.
Kathy and I went to Kellogg. Kellogg said, hey, do you know this guy Everett Hill? I said, I do. I said, he's a good friend of mine too. And Everett does like consulting work with foundations, and he knows that world. And Kathy and I had questions of that world, so it was a no-brainer to put us all together.
My role on the team was really to help design and deploy the data collection process. So we utilized the community-based participatory research protocol and brought together groups of people from the community, took them through a process of asking them what they thought was important, what assets do they believe actually exist, and then through both a frequency analysis of that language data and kind of looking at threads that emerge from the data, we began to develop a picture of some of the things that folks felt were actual assets in the community, but things that were gaps, things that were missing that we could potentially build.
So we had some vacancies and we had to fill them. And we knew we needed a particular skill set to fill them because we were moving forward in a way that we were going to organize through arts-based community development, but also through a large communications campaign and messaging campaign. And so we needed to bring in campaign and messaging professionals. And so we invited Tracy Dingman, who is a website administrator now for the county and has a long career in journalism. She was a writer for Tribune and Journal and really has a political awareness of the community.
So I'm a student of history, and I feel that it's really important to do your research and find out what has come before, what has worked, what can you build on. And I feel the AACETS team is also very cognizant of that. I feel like part of my role with the AACETS team is to provide that research and that history and that grounding.
And then we brought in Gene Grant, and Gene has a very decorated background in politics. He was a staffer for former U.S. Congressman Heather Wilson, and now he is the host of a political talk show on New Mexico PBS. So yeah, his show is like the big brother to my show. So I'm lucky. If it's not for Gene, breaking the color barrier, I don't know if that's true, but I think Gene broke the color barrier on New Mexico PBS, then I don't get a show this many years later. So.
I think the unique skill set I bring is the media stuff that I could bring to the group. My big concern is how do we get a coherent message out to brothers and sisters statewide that folks can respond to?
We're about 2.5–3% of the population in New Mexico, which translates into about 43,000 African Americans. We have some infrastructure in New Mexico, like the African American Performing Arts Center and the Pavilion. We have an Office of African American Affairs. We have a New Mexico Black Chamber of Commerce, many African American churches in communities all over New Mexico.
I think some of the work that we're really doing with AACETS is really focused on strengthening our internal communication. We went around the state and we talked to a lot of people who didn't live in Albuquerque, who said that they just felt completely overlooked. There were all sorts of good things that might be happening, but they don't know anything about them. They don't know about scholarship opportunities. They don't know about all of the candidate, say, workshops, activist workshops, communication workshops that might be happening, in Albuquerque, maybe even in Santa Fe, because New Mexico is so geographically far-flung.
If you are an African American head of household, either single or two-family head of household, you can pick whatever part of the state you want. Where are you going to go? Well, you really need to have some information about our community, where we need to be, how to make decisions about where you think your family needs to go. I think that's what we're going to provide 10 years from now.
I think the Black family is now and has always been strong. It's going to continue to be strong and to survive, but we're going to have a different approach, and it's an approach of focusing on our assets as opposed to always talking about the deficits and talking about what's wrong. We'll be talking about what's right and how we can build up our strengths and focusing on strengths, which is a very important paradigm shift.
I would love to see the Black community have a better relationship with the media. So it isn't just when something goes wrong that the media is coming out and covering us and saying, oh, well, what is everybody all mad about? Why is everybody yelling? What is the latest controversy? Instead, build relationships with the media. I mean, it's on us, it's also on them as well. Build relationships with the media so that there's stories in the media all the time about just normal Black life. The consumers of the media are out there and they're making decisions based on what they see in the media. So that is one way for us to reach people, to normalize our presence and our goodness and our contributions to the community.
Because ultimately it's not about perfection, it's about progress, right? And what we want to see are folks in our community making progress. And I think for a long time, I don't know if we felt like we're making good progress. In terms of policy, right? Being able to capture good data that's disaggregated by race at the state level. That would be some progress. The ability to begin to bring down the numbers of African American kids in the education system who are long-term suspended, right? Being able to see some tangible movement in those numbers. being able to see more African Americans who are, and we do well in this area now, who own their own businesses, right? But to begin to proliferate in terms of folks who are running their own businesses.
I think assets can be effective in New Mexico's economic future because if the African American community rises in our ability to make businesses and to create income and create churn, as they say in the business world, it affects everybody. It helps everybody in New Mexico. So that's the ultimate goal.
We believe that we stand on the shoulders of those individuals who paved the way, those first in our community who sort of broke through those barriers. And now we stand on their shoulders and we look to them for guidance for how we move forward, and we go forward together.
Those things are important because they help to create a level of credibility around what you're trying to accomplish. In some instances, those who sit on the advisory board, people who are in positions where others see them as leaders in the community, and they have the ability to say, this is something worthy of investment.
And what AACETS seeks to do is to find those leaders of the next generation, work with them, develop them to become leaders of the next generation. As we know, they might not look like the leaders that we've had. You know, they might be an arts leader, or they might be, a poet, or they might be skilled in other areas that you wouldn't think of as being leaders, but those people are leaders nonetheless, and we want to help develop that kind of leadership.
African American judges, which we have a few of, African American lawyers here who are doing great work. The dean of the law school now is African American, right? So when people are able to ascend and do well in those positions, those of us in the community who are seeing them succeed gives us a different sense of what our leadership can be.
AACETS is by no means trying to position itself as those new leaders, but to give the community a system for finding and cultivating and supporting and protecting those new leaders.
Now, the reason we're different specifically is what we want to do is be a statewide communications hub and help all those organizations coalesce together so we have a more powerful voice, we have a more coherent voice, we have a louder voice certainly. We have a voice that can't be denied if we have everybody in the game, and how we can do that is disseminating lots of information all the time on policy, on politics, on business, on health, on environment, all the issues that affect us here in New Mexico as a people. And so I'm excited about that difference. I think I've been involved in so many things here over 5, 6, 7 years now, trying to do this exact thing, but I think the time is right now. I think a lot of things have come together for us. Technology's on our side. The national situation's on our side actually a little bit, believe it or not, here in early 2017. I think there are more people looking at us and how we contribute to our economy here in New Mexico and how we can rise up simply as a people and really become more of a force here in New Mexico. I think that makes us different. I really like that a lot.
I don't know, Kellogg took a risk on us and we appreciate it. What they've really allowed us to do with their support and funding over the last 2 years is really do some of this work with the community to kind of articulate what we want, and then shop that resultant idea to other funders, and just giving us the time to do it and allowing us to do it and not bringing in a consultant from Philly or Chicago to do it, I think is important because our relationships helped us accomplish this work, but I also think that it's going to be able to give some sustainability.
All right, here's a question. What does the future look like without assets? All right? I don't like it, because here's why. If we don't do what we need to do right now to ensure a future 10 years from now, a generation from now, well, we're going to look at a situation worse than what we have now. I don't mean to sound dramatic about it, but if we don't have policies in place, structures in place, help in place where we need it 10 years from now, without assets, this is what we're going to have forever here in New Mexico for black families.
Without assets, we will continue to be at the top of every bad list, and we'll be at the bottom of every good list. We'll have New Mexico, if we think of it as a chain, one that is sagging in the middle without all of its citizenry being represented. But with assets and with the work that other organizations like AACETS are doing, we will have an understanding that we are truly better together.
Without AACETS and the research that we've been collecting, we have no context, there is no next chapter, and our story goes untold.
Here's what folks should know. We are empowered and engaged to work together as a community to make progress. We're going to make these investments in ourselves and invite others to do the same.
What's the worst case scenario? What happens if AACETS doesn't come into existence? The trends that have persisted will continue to persist and get worse. There'll be more violence, there'll be more squalor, because that's what happens. That's what happens when people feel pushed, when people feel not cared for, when people feel like they have to come up with their own solutions independent of a community. And so whatever happens to the Black community happens to the rest of the community. We are how we're seen, and if the future persists the way it is without any course correction, it don't look good.